Good evening. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors meeting. It is Wednesday, April 14th, 2021, and we are here at the Freeport High School cafeteria. We have the full board in attendance in person this evening, so yay, no roll call votes. Thank you all for that. We do not have our student reps this evening. They were both had busy schedules, so but we'll carry on in their absence. And we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so before we even get to adjustments of the agenda, we are going to hop right to, I'm not sure where it is on our, 14A, New Business COVID Q&A. Erica Penrod from the Maine CDC is with us this evening via Zoom. And she also has a very busy schedule, so we have a finite period of time with her. So we're going to jump right to that to make sure that we have time to get an update and have some time for questions and answers. So,
yes, I want to thank Erica Penrod for being here, as well as she also has Lizzie Garnett with her, one of the school outbreak investigators. And I will say that Erica especially has been very, very helpful to me in my role. I have her on speed dial, and she's always very willing to take any of my questions. And she's just here tonight to kind of give you some of the latest updates and then answer any questions that you may have. So, Erica, we're going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Becky. Thank you for that introduction. Hello, everyone, for who I have met and not met. My name is Erica Penrod. I am a school investigator with Maine CDC. I am here with Lizzie Garnatz as well, a school investigator, Maine CDC as well. We handle school situations all day, every day. That is just what we specialize in, schools and sports. So I appreciate you guys, taking the time. I really want to hear some of your questions and what you guys have to say and concerns, and just answer anything that we can. So kind of want to just briefly update there, there's new SOPs going out. That's the standard operating procedure for schools, going out about every 3 months or so. We're constantly updating it. So there will be always changes going forward. As soon as we hear more data, we start advocating to our internal team and start trying to get the ball rolling, so that way we can keep policy up with real-time changes and what we find, new findings. So one clarification I just kind of wanted to get while I have everyone here is what determines an outbreak, and what determines outbreak status. There's definitely some misconceptions to what it can mean to be in an outbreak. There are a number of ways to get tested for COVID. There are certain qualifications that each positive case that would qualify towards being an outbreak has to go through. There's a series of about 4 or 5 different qualifications that they have to meet before they can be, we can deem the school an outbreak. An outbreak status does not necessarily mean that the school needs to close operationally and go remote. It does not mean that there is like 100% evidence of in-school transmission. I'm not gonna lie, it does occur, but when it does occur, it's typically where we would expect it. So I'm not too concerned when it comes to school being in an outbreak status. It does not necessarily mean there is increased risk in the school automatically. That's something that we talk with the school. We work with the school at every level: superintendent, principal, school nurse, athletic directors. If anything, it means that now the school has a lifeline at Maine CDC to ask every question to keep all of the students and staff safe. That's the biggest bonus to it, if anything, and it really is not indicative of necessarily indicative of in-school transmission. It does occur, and sometimes we try to capture that every chance we get, but is definitely, if anything, capturing community mobility, community transmission, and the impact on schools. Um, so I just wanted to get that out there, that there is definitely, misconceptions with it. It's a data surveillance metric, an epidemiological metric. It happens with like every infectious disease. These protocols that we have are in place for more than just COVID. But we're also here as a resource. So if anything, it helps your school and your district have more resources and more connections to solve every situation thrown their way. So I wanted to keep my end kind of short because since we do have only an allotted amount of time, I really wanted to hear questions from whoever has them. Whoever has questions, I don't know how best to call on people or for those questions to get raised, but anyone is welcome to bring anything up.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Did you have any that people had sent ahead of time that we want to ask, or do we just?
Yes, Erica, would you talk about, I think one of the big concerns we have is about the 3-foot distancing that is currently required between students. And I guess we would like to know, what is the data going to look like before they're going to loosen up on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, very valid. The distancing definitely makes it tricky to have all the kids in school all at once. I would say once people are more vaccinated and more age groups are vaccinated, and we can look at what transmission risk looks like then, there might be, wiggle room for adjustment, but that's something that we would have to, reassess down the road. I always try to point out just pretty much anyone that I talk to that Maine is very blessed that we've been able to be in some sort of hybrid model throughout this last year, where other states have gone fully remote for extended periods of time, if not the whole year. Some states only have private sports because their school districts don't have their sports going at all. So there's definitely, things to be very thankful for that we do have in place. And just to remember that we are getting closer and closer, and I can personally not push us there fast enough, but at the same time, we need to do it safely. We need to make sure that your kids are safe and that the staff's safe at the same time.
Can you talk about specifically what transmission data you're looking at? Are you looking at the positivity rate or just the number of cases we're having per day, or the number of people that have received like 2 doses of vaccine?
Yeah, so there are different studies that are released. There are particular like journals and platforms that we will look at that we know are credible sources, peer-reviewed, morbidity reports released by the CDC. There's usually some schools already doing that data tracking. So we try to, instead of recreating the wheel, use what they're learned and be able to apply it. I have seen a trend as, New England states adopt certain policies, Maine typically follows suit. And that's because the data has been reviewed now by X amount of states. Maine is more reserved of making sure that we keep our people safe. But at the same time, we've been able to be hybrid because we've been on, erring on the side of caution.
Can you talk about the lunch requirement around the 6 feet between the students? Because I know a lot of districts throughout the state are really, that's a huge hurdle, and it's one of the reasons why we had to do an abbreviated day at the high school when we brought all of our kids back. So what is the data saying around that?
So that one's a lot more difficult to flex because they're not masked. They're eating. Lunchtime, as you know, is not just sit forward and eat your food and not say anything. Kids tend to typically, holler to the kid down the table. They might be sitting in their spot and getting up to get a drink here and there or something, but they're still being kind of active. So that's definitely something to consider. Utilizing as, assigned seating. So that way, if someone is there while infectious, we can work at maybe a radius, and we can have more confidence in saying who was within that radius, who was deemed a close contact. And that's where, you guys have reached out to me, and we've, you reach out to your local investigator, myself or Lizzie, and we can help work through those nitty-gritty details. As far as it changing, I think it's going to depend on the rate of different age groups, each school, elementary, middle, high school, being vaccinated, as well as what our alternate options could be for extensive barriers, whether that's plastic shields, plastic barriers to keep everyone in their own kind of like clear cubicle. I don't know. That would be something we would have to work through and kind of really sit down and hypothesize on what would work well. I'm open to it because then I can propose it to our internal team. But at the same time, that's a very hard one because people aren't masked. That masks have proven to work. That the mitigation strategies schools are doing are working. That's why we're not seeing as much in-school transmission. So it's hard to flex that one when we know it's keeping our kids safe.
But are those conversations taking place, do you know, at the CDC team level right now?
Oh, absolutely. I have advocated for us addressing lunch, and that's where we're looking at putting into the new updates for the SOP of, a 14-foot radius at lunch with the assigned seating and other things. So these are all things that we're working in the details out for upcoming, that and buses, because that can definitely be hindering getting all the kids back in school, depending on how rural of an area you're in. So absolutely, these are things that are on the table. I usually don't get my way the first time or the second time, but eventually I persevere. And it's just a matter of the data catching up, vaccination rates catching up. And to be honest, not sending your kids to school while symptomatic. That's a huge risk factor that, if they're at lunch while symptomatic, it's just like the reporting things in the morning for the schools are important for that reason. It definitely gets very frustrating. I can only imagine waking up and all of a sudden having to kind of rearrange your day because your kid has, a runny nose and a sore throat, whatever it may be.
My name is Ray Grogan. I'm a middle school principal here in Freeport. Is there any consideration of having different lunch rules for inside and out? Because currently we have to abide by the exact same rules for inside and outside dining.
Great question. So we are addressing, that's one of the things that's going to be on the table, looking at for the next round of SOP updates is outside classrooms, outside dining. And this is also going to kind of relay and transcend into summer camps and outside eating and being able to kind of cross-utilize some of these policies. I hope to minimize close contact lists, but it is on the table. It's not there yet. The standard definition of 6 foot, 15 minutes. If they're hollering, yelling, singing, just kind of being loud in general, I like to use a 14-foot bubble. But then, we're here to help try and minimize those close contact lists as best possible, as safe as possible.
Thank you.
Lindsay, did you have anything to add to that? I don't know if you have talking capabilities now that I think of it.
Did we add the other person, Lizzie? Sorry, hold on just a sec. We can get her promoted to a
Wonderful.
Lizzie.
So this is something that she's brought up a couple of times as well, and just trying to strategize, how best to approach that.
Okay, I think she can unmute herself and speak.
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Hi, awesome. Thank you for having me this evening. Erica, I think, has done a great job covering everything so far. And I would just add to that you are not the first school or school board to inquire about updating guidance for inside versus outside eating, learning, and sports. That's absolutely something that's on the table right now. And we are working on getting some more outside specific guidance updated before summertime and summer camps come out. So I know it seems a bit slow, but please stay tuned, and we are certainly advocating for that.
Great, thank you. Jen.
Hi, I was just wondering, you made a comment about the vaccinations being one of the things you look at in terms of changing some of the rules. And I'm just wondering how that how you look at that, considering that there isn't a vaccine for under 16 right now. So is it more looking at having teachers and staff all vaccinated and anyone over the age of 16? Or, I mean, I'd hate to think we're waiting for a vaccine for under 16 until
Yeah,
we.
so, no, that's a great point. So primarily we've been focused on making sure, the teachers and staff feel safe and they're vaccinated. 16-year-olds is all fairly new, so we have just kind of been letting people get signed up and go through the process. By the fall, I mean, we hope to be able to have a vaccine for the younger kids as well. It's just, that's definitely going to play a factor in rates of transmission, you know, everything. It's not it's not a dominant factor, but at the same time, we're, I don't see it going lower than 3 feet until we can really see that there is minimal risk for going maybe to 2 feet, but at the same time, when we say 3 feet, reality is kids, they need a little wiggle room. So we understand that as well. So it's definitely a tricky balance.
Beth.
Hi. I think you said something in your first speech there, Erica, where you said the spread is happening in schools where it's expected. And I don't think that we've experienced any spread in our schools. It seems that we've had cases that come in that have been contracted elsewhere. So I'm just wondering if that's actually what you said, and where is that expected? Like lunchtime, or what does that mean?
Great question. So that wasn't necessarily pertaining to your schools. I was talking in a more general scope of, from what I've seen, I've been working with schools since November. And where we would typically expect it are situations where the mitigation strategies failed. They just weren't used for whatever reason, where they're, it's typically like best friends, whether their students or staff, they eat together, they're unmasked. There's probably some social time as well, which is also, another community-based factor. People where there's barriers to wearing face masks, whether that's, health issues, whatever it may be, and hand-over-hand assistance. When you're in direct contact with someone on a daily basis for whatever reason in a school setting, direct contact, there's a reason why they're calling it direct contact, and all it takes is a hug to be considered a close contact, because that rate of transmission is so high. So if where mitigation strategies, falter for whatever reason it may be, each situation is different, or there's other social factors as well. That's why mitigation strategies are so important, and I can't stress that enough. Schools have been doing a phenomenal job of keeping our kids safe. So when I'm doing an outbreak at a school and an outbreak investigation, I am almost using it to capture community impact on schools rather than community or in-school transmission, because I'm not seeing as much if any in-school transmission. So if anything, it's just showing that schools are doing a great job and it's not spreading throughout the school.
Susanna.
Thank you very much, Erica and Lizzie. I've got a quick question about the contacting and tracing, I guess, of that. Just wondering how that's working with as more people get vaccinated. Because to the best of my knowledge, schools aren't tracking among staff and students who's getting vaccinated. And so I'm just wondering how that contact tracing is working with identifying contacts who have been vaccinated or haven't been vaccinated in terms of who needs to quarantine and how that's working. Thank you.
So when someone is identified as a close contact, let's say the positive person identifies their friend as a close contact, but they don't know they've been vaccinated for whatever reason. That close contact, they're going to probably get contacted by Sarah Alert. They'll have a contact tracer that they're assigned to. They can, show them their vaccination card, show proof of not, and seeing 14 days post-vaccination, and work with their contact tracings. If there's ever an issue, always call the 1-800 number. That is something that we encourage, or the vaccine line, as well. Because that's something that they can help and work with contact tracers if needed. We're not, that's a very valid point. We're not tracking necessarily each person, but if someone's identified as a positive after already being vaccinated, we do, take all of their vaccine information and whatnot so that we can really show that they were fully vaccinated and then they still became positive.
And this is Lizzie, just to add to that, if nurses have access to Impact, they'll be able to look up vaccine records the same way that they would for any other vaccines that they need to verify. So if somebody's fully vaccinated, they'll be exempt from quarantine. And we're in a bit of an interesting in-between time right now where some folks are fully vaccinated, some people are not quite fully vaccinated, but they've received one dose. Some people are still waiting for the 2 weeks to pass before they reach fully vaccinated. But eventually that is something that folks will need to be mindful of and keep track of in terms of quarantine exemption, and also watching for any potential breakthrough cases.
Jen.
So just to follow up with that, as far as I know, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that teachers don't have to share information about whether or not they're vaccinated, and that's not something that the nurse can access. So I'm concerned that with those types of things being the necessary things to eliminate any kind of 3-foot rule, that if there's anything in place to address that, because that data doesn't seem like it's going to be very accurate.
So some schools have used their nurse, as the primary point of contact for all student, staff, health, everything. And some keep it very separate where, someone else handles the internal stuff and they just handle the students. So it definitely depends on each district's setup. But teachers are, essential workers. So if they do not, for one, they can work during quarantine. And for two, they technically should really still be 6 feet from the kids when possible. And then, they're even more so protected. But that way, in real time, if it's 6 to 4 feet because they're walking around and stuff, there's at least a little bit more of a bubble.
I think the question was if we're concerned about, or we're keying in on vaccination rates to consider the requirements in the SOP, but we don't have a mandated way to track who's been vaccinated. How do we reconcile those two things? And actually, that was one of my questions is I had spoken with someone else who doesn't work in education, who works in a corporation in the safety department. And they had mentioned something about, because it's a public health emergency, we can ask if people are vaccinated, but I didn't know legally if we can or not. Do you?
Yeah,
No?
So COVID specific related topics among specific health professionals we can share. CDC, Maine CDC and Maine DOE have this partnership, but it's because we're in a pandemic and it's COVID specific. That it makes it more difficult when people are very public about certain things, and then there's information that is shared publicly, and that adds other layers. And just to your point with the vaccination rates regarding the SOP, that is not like a primary determining factor. We primarily look at, the state of Maine, what percentage of our population do we have vaccinated? What percentage of our school population, if they have that data from the DOE side would have that data, is vaccinated. But it's not like a primary determining factor on where things are at. It would be much more transmission rate. But I don't see a lot of the footage fudging too much unless there's maybe like physical barriers between students.
So I might have missed this in your response, but can we ask or not? We can?
It depends.
But they don't have to.
Yes, schools can ask. It is someone's right to decline. Then if, they're butting heads there, that's a DOE subject. That's out of my hands at that point. That, you can ask the union, you can ask the DOL, but that is not my category at that point. Anyone is your nurses are welcome to ask so they can gain more information, so that way they can make better, more informed decisions. Everyone has the right to decline. At the same time, we are in a pandemic, so there's going to be some butting heads. So if there are butting heads on that subject, I recommend reaching out to, you know, your local union rep, your local HR, DOL. And if you ever need links, please let me know. I can absolutely send, you know, Becky an email of resources or links and people that do.
And when you say they can decline decline to tell us one way or the other, because obviously anybody can decline getting the vaccine as well, but they can decline to tell us, right?
Technically, yes, they can decline to tell you. If push came to shove and their HR was like, hey, we really need to, we're in a pandemic, that's a different category, but that's not for me to say.
Okay, thank you. Beth?
I was just thinking that what she was, and Erica, correct me if I'm wrong, that it was that the DOE and the CDC has access to who's been vaccinated and who hasn't, kind of thing. Is that correct?
So, yes and no. We have everything very split as far as programs, so we have our whole vaccine team that has access to, you know, everything. If you have access, nurses have access to Impact, like Lucia pointed out, then they have access to vaccine records. But we do have partnerships to kind of work through positive cases and whatnot. Vaccines is just a little bit new of a category. I don't touch it. I refer everyone to the vaccine line. I've called the vaccine line when I've had offhand questions that I just need an immediate answer to. I can't recommend it enough.
Vali?
Thank you for attending the meeting and answering your questions. My question was a follow-up to the comment that was made about minimal risk needed to be in place before any restrictions are loosened. When we talk about minimal risk, are we evaluating also the risk that comes associated with kids not being in school? And by that I mean social, emotional, academic risks.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I weigh that with a very high weight. Mental health, absolutely. I can't advocate enough to get our kids into school. With that same token, it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Like I talk a lot and then we look 1 step forward. So it's kind of a slow process because we have to have policy catch up, but that is our ultimate goal. That's the new SOP. We offer alternate options for schools as far as contact tracing. There are parameters that have to get set up. It's a district decision. It works for some, not for all, but we are trying to adjust our policies so that way, you know, when kids are in school, everyone is in school. We're minimizing close contacts as best we can.
And just to add to that, we are very aware of the fact that when kids are not in school, some of their social contacts might in fact be much higher risk than the type of contact that they would be having while in school. I'm thinking like maskless social gatherings, that kind of thing that might come as a result of being home. And so we do keep that in mind, and Erica and I are really advocating and using that as a tool to push for getting everybody back in school, in addition to the social, emotional, mental health piece of things as well.
Could you address, as we have our staff vaccinated, is there talk of loosening that up about the 6 feet between the teacher and the student when the masks are on? Because that would, you know, gain us some space in all of the classrooms.
Potentially. Potentially we could look at, you know, a vaccinated teacher being slightly closer. But that's something that would need DOE approval as well, because those are nurses that have been able to see a lot. They've been through a pandemic before, some of them. But that's absolutely on the table for, you know, next time they're like, hey, what do you have for recommendations? I send up my list. And part of that is, you know, vaccinated teachers, if they feel comfortable. I cannot stress that enough. Like this is, and if they feel comfortable, just like they can work as an essential worker if they feel comfortable doing so. And just a fair warning, everyone, we have about 5 minutes left here. Lizzie and I have been working straight all day. So trying to keep ourselves kind of contained here.
So I'd like to ask one more question. What is your advice, you know, as we're planning right now for September? Your best guess about, should I be planning for the 3 feet between kids, the 6 feet, you know? I mean, because we can't wait until August, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's so hard to answer because thinking about where we were 6 months ago was so different than where we are now. So it's hard to think about what's going to happen in the next 6 months. It's hard to say for sure. And I recognize that that's really frustrating because you want to be as prepared as possible to get everything ready to go. But like Erica said, there's a chance that maybe even 12 to 15-year-olds will have the opportunity to be vaccinated by September. We just don't know yet. One of the things that we do recommend that does kind of require a lot of work on the front end is, as much as you can, planning around seating charts and cohorting people so that in the event that you have to do contact tracing, it cuts down on the number of people in quarantine.
Yep, absolutely. And applying that to sports, applying that to all settings that you possibly can. I can't stress it enough. Lunchtime as well. That way, it is the other option where you don't know where people sat, you don't know who they were around, out of an abundance of caution, because we do care about our kids in our community. Everyone is typically deemed a close contact. So seating charts, and whatever works for each school really needs to be independent for each school and what works for their team. And then outdoor classrooms, outdoor seatings as much as possible, and just planning for at least the beginning of the school year to still have that as an option. But our SOP, like I said, is getting updated about every 3 months. We are putting in a bunch of updates to have it kind of catch up. We just released one not too long ago. I think there'll probably be another one released sooner than later, just because of the Now testing that has been allocated for schools. They're going to put in some stuff probably to reflect a lot of that, which will honestly keep everyone a lot more safe and only give us more information.
Okay. Thank you, Erica and Lizzie. I appreciate you taking the time tonight to be with us and answer our questions. It's great to have sort of a direct line to folks that are doing this on a day-to-day basis. So we appreciate your time and recognize how hard you guys are working. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for that. And we recognize the hard work the schools are doing. Like I said, Maine's very blessed in the fact, and I'm very thankful to be able to say almost all of our schools have been in some sort of hybrid model throughout the year. And schools have only gone remote when it's due to staffing issues typically. So it's great to be able to say, as I'm looking at the federal guidance, I'm like, oh, it's not that bad. Like, I'm looking at the different levels of like potential amount of cases per a 7-day window. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is at least a little uplifting news in comparison to what some of the other states are dealing with. So thank you guys for everything you're doing. It's working and we appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, guys. All right. So we will jump back into our regular agenda. So do we have a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes from the March 17th, 2021 and March 24th, 2021 as presented, barring any errors or omissions? Jeremy, thank you. Valley, second. All those, you have a question?
Can I just amend that I was in here in person?
Yes.
Thank you.
Do we have to note that in the minutes? Is that how we're doing it generally?
I don't know. It's noted that I wasn't, so.
Oh, it said you attended remotely, but you weren't remote. You were here. Gotcha. I see what you're saying. Okay, perfect. And actually, so not the 17th. Were you here both of them or just the 24th?
I didn't see that. Just the 24th then.
Okay, so the 17th was accurate that you were.
I think so. Yeah,
remote.
I didn't see that difference.
Yep. Okay. So we're good. And then the 24th, yeah, because that's the one that has you not here. So, okay, I think they're accurate. Without any other comments or questions on those, all those in favor? Great, none opposed. We don't have any other adjustments to the agenda, right? No. Our student reps are busy elsewhere this evening. So we will move on to the first public comment of our agenda, which would be taken via Zoom. It doesn't look like we have anybody here in person this evening. Do we have anybody on Zoom?
I only see some of our administrators, no members of the public.
Okay. So we'll have a couple other opportunities because the Q&A for the FY22 budget is shortly. So we'll have another opportunity for folks with questions on the budget and then another public comment at the end. So if folks are trying to get through that, you'll have another chance or two. So then we will move on to the report from the superintendent.
Yes, and the report tonight is just about our resignations, and these are effective at the end of the year. Taylor Marshall, first grade teacher at Durham Community School. Jill Marsankis, literacy specialist at Durham Community School. Matt Halpern, Moore Street kindergarten teacher. And Stephen Moore, the Freeport High School science teacher and ed tech.
I think that could be the quickest superintendent's report on record. Okay, so now we're back to public comment again. This one is specific to the budget, the FY22 budget questions. But I suppose if we still don't have anybody on Zoom. Yeah, I don't imagine the admins want to ask questions about the budget. I suppose if they do, they could raise their hands.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to not give them the opportunity to comment. I just, there's no other folks other than RSU 5.
No, that's fine. No problem. But I believe that we have this Q&A on the budget for our next board meeting, which is 2 weeks from today. So if folks, as they're perusing the budget documents in their spare time, if they come across questions or concerns that they'd like to ask the board, they will have another opportunity to do that on the 28th. So nobody's on, then we'll just carry on with our agenda. We don't have any administrator reports, board comments or committee or policy, so we will move on to unfinished business. Well, we'll do the motion, then we'll talk about it. So is there a motion for consideration and approval to amend the March 24th, 2021 FY22 board adopted budget by reducing Article 3, Career and Technical Education, by $38,619, and the revised total of Article 3 will be $142,979. Susanna, second from Beth, thank you. So as you guys will recall, we adopted the budget based on the information we had at the time about Region 10. They had another meeting since then, and Jen can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the reduction for the Region 10 allocation for all three towns was a result of Region 10 going to the state, to the DOE, and asking that they include the additional square footage of the portables that they're planning to buy when they're figuring out how much it costs to educate the kids. They include square footage information and maintenance and all those things. So the increased square footage increased the funding that they would receive from the state, which then in turn reduced how much had to be collected from the sending towns. Is that right, Jen?
That is correct. Do you want me to comment on that meeting? Just
Sure.
A little bit? Okay. So the meeting was called, it was a special meeting due to, I think there was some questions about the budget that had not been answered. So actually the superintendent, Paul Perzanowski, came to the meeting with all of those reductions already prepared. The meeting then went into like a kind of Q&A of questions that had been sent to him about other situations in the budget that people had issue with. And those were all discussed, but we still haven't voted on the budget. That doesn't happen until we return back from April vacation. So we are still waiting to hear. We did ask the superintendent to find out if, in lieu of hiring a new business manager and purchasing all the technology that goes along with it, which is still over $180,000 addition to the budget. And obviously that salary continues every year, so that's not a COVID expense. He is going to let us know if I think it's Brunswick, would still offer to do the bookkeeping, I guess, for that, which is approximately $70,000, but it also doesn't, create the need for that new technology. There were also some other questions about salaries and increases in salaries that were explained. So I think that I'm not quite sure that when he comes back with that answer about the business manager position, if we'll then have a continued discussion, and then it would just be, then we vote on the budget based on, how you feel about that. But there was a long discussion about the new sort of, the four-year technical school, and that was the information that we were provided as to why they need a business manager, and it went into that was going to involve fundraising. So it was very confusing, actually, about what that position is, and I still am honestly very confused about it myself. So hopefully, maybe it will go down even more. I mean, we appreciated the fact that it went down as much as it did, but I still think, I know that a couple other people on the Region 10 board also had issue with the fact that it's still a significant increase during this time, where the rest of us, the other districts, sending districts, are really trying to keep the, absolute minimum of an increase, and it's still a pretty significant increase. I think it ends up being about $40,000 more still than it was last year. So I'll keep you posted, but that's kind of where it is. I mean, it's great that it was reduced, but I still think it's a pretty significant increase.
Thank you, Jen. I know you went to that meeting and carried our flag of, questioning those expenditures. So I appreciate your efforts on that. And who knows, maybe they'll change their minds. Any other questions on this? So basically what this will do, this will just bring down our the total budget by that $38,619. So we're just adjusting that one Article 3 for the Region 10 budget. All right, if seeing no other questions, and we have a motion and a second, all those in favor? Great, none opposed. Okay, so in your packets, 13B is it's all of the information around the public hearing. So as you guys will recall, typically what we would do is we would call the 3-town meeting where folks could come and debate the budget and vote each article up or down. And then whatever comes out of that meeting would then go to referendum in June. Given the limitations still on large gatherings, the state has allowed us to bypass that 3-town meeting again and just go straight to the referendum. So, but by doing that, we have to have a public hearing, which will be a part of one of our board meetings. It'll be a very distinct part of one of our board meetings. So we have to call that public hearing and then approve the warrants as they're laid out here, which is based on what we've approved, including what we just adjusted, and then approve the notice of the public hearing. So there's some requirements on the timing, 30 days prior to, so to make sure we stay within all the rules and regulations around the public hearing and the referendum vote. That's what this green package is doing. And then, so on your referendum ballot, which I think there's also a sample in here for that too, it will instead of a typical referendum question for this, are you in favor of the budget that was approved at the 3-town meeting, yes or no? But because we don't have that meeting, you'll see there's 6 questions that we're statutorily obligated to ask. So a little bit more on the ballot, but I think still the right way to go. But our next vote here is to basically call all of those meetings, approve all the warrants, and today's the fun night where we get to sign all of those documents in a big long row. So don't go anywhere when we're done, because we've got some work to do. All right, that being said, so do we have a motion that the vote entitled "Vote to Call a Regional School Unit Budget Referendum, Call a Public Hearing, Approve the Referendum Warrants, and approve the Notice of Public Hearing be approved in the form presented to this meeting, and that a copy of said vote to be included with the minutes of this meeting"? Susanna, thank you. Second, Beth. Any questions? Yes, Maddie.
If the next Region 10 meeting gets further complicated and we have to adjust our budget again because of it, will we have to revisit this whole process?
We probably wouldn't, just because once we've printed the ballots, which I believe we have sent to the printers, we can't really adjust the numbers again. So if they were to drop further, so say they were to come back and reconsider some of those expenditures and choose to decrease them, I'm not sure we could adjust our budget in time for our referendum. And then it would just reduce how much we actually have to send to Region 10, and the difference would roll into the undesignated fund balance that we could use next year to offset taxes. Jen, yeah.
If I had a crystal ball, I would say that budget is probably going to pass, even with the questions that are still up in the air.
We love a good crystal ball. Does that answer the question, Maddie? Yeah. Susanna.
Can I just ask, I know we sort of covered this, so I'm probably just playing devil's advocate here, but if the budget goes back and increases in Region 10, I don't know that that's likely, but I understand we've spoken about, the undesignated fund balance, but if we end up needing to spend more, then are we able to do that, or
we wouldn't.
How does that process work?
It would work, in all likelihood, it would, there's a couple places it could come out of. We do build in a contingency every year of 176. I'm looking at Rick, does that sound right? $176,000. So the past several years, we haven't had to dip into that at all. So that would be available if they came back and increased what our assessment was. But it's an interesting question because the ballots include the budget number for the full Region 10 budget. So I'm not sure what happens if they change that number. Do you know, Rick? Okay.
I can
Interesting
look at
question.
my crystal ball again and tell you that I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, my crystal ball says that too, and I have fewer contacts than you have there. But can you, Michelle, talk about that 176,
Yes.
the contingency fund? So if that's not used, does that become undesignated funds?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So historically, how we've used it is that's been part of the undesignated fund balance that we roll into the next year. So 700,000 that we're using this year. A portion of that is the 176 we didn't use last year. So we kind of roll that forward. Any other questions on the public hearing, the votes, et cetera? No? Okay. So all those in favor? Great. None opposed. We've already done the COVID Q&A. Thank you, Becky, for lining that up for us. That was helpful. Okay, board discussion on staff appreciation. Sorry. I don't know why that's a hard word to say for me today. This is something that Maura and I had started talking about, I don't know, a month or two ago. Just in terms of recognizing the lift, the requirements, the all of the pieces and parts that have been asked of our teachers and our staff and everybody in our schools this year. And, you know, is there a way as a board that we could thank them for that? And so, you know, we had mentioned it to Becky as an idea and see if she had any thoughts, and sort of floated it out to the board around interest in that. And it seemed like folks were interested. So we wanted to put it on the agenda as something, a conversation, to see if what people's thoughts were on that. Vali.
I would be very much in favor of doing something like that. We do still have funds that we haven't expended this year that we could, instead of allowed to lapse into undesignated fund balance for the following year, we could use some of that. Becky suggested maybe some kind of gift certificate or a little bonus or something like that for all the staff. I would be totally in favor. And I also want to acknowledge and recognize a community member who also emailed to the board suggesting that we do this. So there's support both from leadership and the board, and also from at least this one community member who wrote. I think it's very much appropriate to do that.
Jen.
I'm in 100% agreement as well. I think it might be helpful before, if we are going to have a discussion about it, to find out what we can't do. Because I think there must be some parameters around, you know, monetary bonuses. I mean, I don't know, maybe Rick can speak to that. Just so we kind of know if there are limits in terms of things that we're not allowed to do with school money, I guess.
Well, we probably can't give them illegal things.
Well, yes. I just know if like you know what I mean? Like monetary bonuses, like is that something that a school board, I mean.
Yeah, it's certainly something you can do. The one thing that Rick, I called him a little bit of a buzzkill when he sent it out, was to remember was that just it's taxable, right? So anything we do is taxable. So, you know, if the board came down on even something like a gift certificate, like very, pretty much everything, they're going to tax it like it was income. So, you know, if the board chose to do something, my recommendation is that we gross up whatever we decide to do, so that there's no tax implication to the employees. So it truly is like, what we're hoping to give them is what they actually get without any tax implications of that. Vali.
So Becky, how many employees do we have in RSU 5? Just to have an idea of, okay, what kind of numbers are we talking about, so that we can decide what is something that would be nice, but that we can afford.
So we have 408 employees. That does not include our subs, and it doesn't include our coaches. And so, you know, I was thinking that it would just, you know, go to full-time. Well, we have some part-time staff. I think that they should also receive it, but
Permanent staff.
permanent staff. So that doesn't include the coaches or the subs.
So 400, just over 400. Beth.
I am also in support of this. Again, I'm not sure exactly what it would look like, but I am fully in support of showing all of the employees, because I feel like it's been a rough year for everyone, and they really have stepped up to everything that, you know, we and Becky and all the administrators have really asked and requested of them. So I'd be very grateful if we could do this somehow.
I'm thinking one way it could look is just like in their last paycheck for the year or something like that, that would probably be, you know, one of the easier things to do. I'm looking at Rick for a nod rather than even like gift certificates. I just think it would be.
Yep. Yeah, and then people could use it however makes the most sense for them. Maddie?
I also want to voice my support for this, in part because we've been we've considered ourselves a leader around the state in terms of our model, and bringing as many kids back to 5 days a week as we could, as quickly as we could. And we've asked our staff to really bear the brunt of that quick thinking. So I know that bonuses are atypical in a union environment, but I would love to see us lead there as well. I know sometimes the worry about setting up something like this is that, does it then become an expectation every time there's a difficult year? But I truly think that the extenuating circumstances this year speak for themselves.
I sure hope this is a once-in-a-lifetime year. Valerie, did you have your hand up?
I did, but I can wait.
Okay. I'm not sure if you have to wait. Oh, Mara.
Could have gone, but I agree with all of you, and thank you for your support, and wholeheartedly agree with showing appreciation to our teachers and all of our staff for this just impossibly difficult year. And I just wanted to remind our community members that our teachers and staff did have a furlough day, so they lost a day out of their paychecks this year. So in my mind, this is, whatever it is making up for some small part of that they already sacrificed amongst everything else.
Good point. Thank you for that reminder. Valerie.
So I just wanted to mention that if we do something at the end of the year, I wanted to ask Rick if it'd be possible to separate whatever we do from their normal salary, because sometimes you just lump something into the number, the final number that they get paid for. It's not the same, because some people don't realize that there's an extra whatever it is into their paycheck. So if there's a strategy we can use to make sure that this is recognized as something because of the additional effort this year, I think it will be helpful.
Sorry, you have to come to the mic. You're welcome. Yeah, I agree, because particularly if we're going to gross it up for the tax purposes, having it be a separate thing probably makes it cleaner too.
You've answered the question. It'll be a separate warrant, payroll warrant, so yes, of course we can do that.
Okay, great, thank you. Before you leave, Jen?
This seems like a Rick question. So is there a number that, as I've said a million times, not a numbers person, but doing a quick calculation, $100 per person, $40,000. So is there a number that's like something appropriate that we should be looking at, or?
I have to tell you, Jen, it would be inappropriate for me to suggest a number to you.
Right, I don't mean suggest, but like, is there a?
I could suggest one.
Okay, then maybe it's not a Rick question.
And really, it's at the board's discretion about what that amount is. It's really it's incumbent upon me to ensure that whatever it is that you plus up, that again, that the appropriate taxes are withheld for that.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
My suggestion was going to be $250 per employee. That was, it felt like it was meaningful enough to recognize the effort and everything they've put in, but also respectful of our taxpayers. And to Mara's point, with that furlough day, I think that was sort of the number that I had in my head, but obviously that's just my thought. So whatever other folks are thinking. Valerie.
So Rick, I've asked you this before, and you said it's impossible to know before the end of the year, but are we any closer to knowing how much funding we will have unused by the end of the year?
Well, the answer to your question is yes, we're closer, only because there's more time, but we're not any closer to exactly what that number is going to be. And in fact, this sort of illustrates that point, until I know exactly how much it's going to cost and the other things. Again, as I reported to the Finance Committee tonight, I still feel fairly strongly that we'll be in the 1.5 to 1.9 million, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jen.
Just to keep things rolling along, I agree. I think the number that you came up with, Michelle, seems appropriate, and it seems like enough to really show appreciation in the addition, to cover the taxes. And thanks for bringing that up more about the furlough day, because that is a great thing to think about in terms of what was given up. So I'm just in support of the 250, and if anyone else has any.
Maddie?
I also like a flat number without regard for seniority or salary or hours worked. I think it shows appreciation for it to be clear.
Beth?
I would like to propose more. I feel like if we have potentially 1.5 million in the undesignated fund, or whatever it is at the end, that 250 ends up being about 100,000.
It's about 120,000 with
120?
all
Okay.
taxes and everything all in.
Okay, all right. So personally, I would like to see it like 300, but that's just me.
Susanna?
Yeah, I'm also in support of this, and I appreciate also what Maddie was saying about having a flat number across the board that is ignoring seniority, et cetera. But I'm also interested in Beth's route about looking at, really what our range could be, because I think we could do a little bit more, but I'd like to see what those numbers come out and explore that. So, thank you.
Lindsay?
I'm fully in support of it, in gratitude. I like the idea of it being a paycheck or a separate. Gift cards get lost, places go out of business, and they can feel more like a headache than anything else. So, and I would love to see the range of what's possible too. I mean, this year has been just outrageous, and we did change things on them quickly, and sometimes against their what they've wanted, and yeah, and I love the flat rate. I'm learning all sorts of terms tonight, but I really appreciate that too. So thank you.
Molly?
I'm comfortable with either the 250 or the 300. I think they both show great appreciation. I'm not sure if the difference, $50, makes the gift more meaningful or not. But having said that, if people want to go to 300, I'm comfortable doing that too.
So I guess, so are we coming down on a number, or are people interested in seeing what that actually equates to? Susanna?
I'd like to see actual numbers rather than picking a number tonight. And, I've mentioned 250 and 300. And, just to see if we have that range of 1.5 to 1.9 million, how much of that can we, and I'm not suggesting that entire sum, but just seeing some numbers that are a little higher, but seeing what that looks at, and I'd rather see that, I guess, than make a decision right now.
I mean, if 250 is 120,000,
Yeah, that's
I
true.
mean,
I could do the
300
math
is
in my head.
20% more, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's another 20 grand. We're looking at 140.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, clearly you could go, I would never suggest this, but for $1.5 million, I mean, you could make that number really big, right? I wouldn't think that from a respect for taxpayers, we would do that. So I think for our budget for future years that we would want to do that. But, I think we just need to sort of 250, 300, I'm comfortable in that range. If the board feels a little more than 200 or 250 is appropriate, I can get on board with that. I'm not sure where I'd be too much farther north than that. Just with everything else. But Valerie?
I agree with Michelle's position. I mean, just a reminder, we're using 700,000 this year to offset taxes. So next year we may need that or more, because we did get a lot of federal and state aid this year. who knows when I continue to receive that. And as we just heard from the CDC, we may need to continue to have additional supports to be able to follow the CDC guidelines and the distancing requirements and all that. And also out of respect for taxpayers, a lot of whom are still not working. A gift is a really great idea because of all the effort, but I don't think we need to go overboard, making the gift so big that is offensive to taxpayers who are still struggling.
Susanna, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's not quite what I meant, but more, Rick, I know you're saying that the budget, sort of where we're looking going forward, is still a lot of things coming up. And I guess just, are we wanting to make this decision tonight, or are we sort of looking at it as other things are settling to? 'Cause I'm perfectly happy in the 250, 300 range. I just didn't know, I guess when I meant numbers, wasn't sort of like proposing, you know, what's the maximum we can give to everybody right now, but just looking at how the budget is sort of settling in terms of other things. But if we want to make the decision now, the 250, 300 is somewhere in which I'm comfortable. 'Cause I don't want to be, obviously aware of the tax, and I don't want to be, that's not where I was trying to go with that comment, so thank you.
Perfect, thanks. Jen?
So good thing you stayed there, Rick. So to follow up with what I asked, and I thought that was a great answer, that it comes back to us. So now back to you as the person who's handling the money. Do you feel that either one of those numbers, which is $102,000 or $122,400, are both numbers that are within the range of comfort?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
So I think the 250 was 120,000.
Michelle, are you counting for the buffer for the taxes? Is that why? Because if you just straight multiply
Yes,
408
yes.
times.
Yeah.
The problem
Okay.
is that estimating the taxes is a little difficult because everybody's taxes are a little bit different.
Yeah.
So 120,000 is a relatively solid number. I suspect it'll be less than that, but at the outer range. And then there will be, I'm sure, some discussion about, well, what about this particular employee? What about this or that? You know, because we had a discussion about who would actually fall into that cohort and who wouldn't. And there may be a case where this one really does need to go in there for various reasons. So at 250, 120,000 is a reasonable estimation of what this will cost you.
That makes sense.
So when you say 120,000 for 250, you're adding some extra for taxes?
Taxes.
That's
and
grossing it up.
That's
Okay.
exactly right.
Okay, so
Exactly
then
right.
if we're looking at the 122 for the $300, you'd add a portion up, let's say it would bring it up to 145 or something like that.
Something like
Okay,
that.
Exactly right.
so, because my calculator did
Absolutely.
those numbers.
I knew one of you was going to pull out a calculator. Absolutely.
Jeremy?
I'm just very generally in support of it also, and the 300 seems about right. It's a nice round number, and then call it good.
Okay. So am I hearing general consensus support for the 300 level? Okay. I don't think this is something we have to vote on.
I would say.
You'd rather have a vote?
Yes.
Did anybody draft a motion? But if we're not doing it until the end of the year, do we just want to have the vote at the next meeting? No, you want to do it now? All right, let's do it. I'm going to let you draft it on the fly. You're going to let me draft it?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so do we have, oh
A
God.
motion?
Yes.
Motion. Should we have some sort of, like Rick alluded to, leeway in there so the determination is, like if we had a long-term substitute, for example, who has worked
Like the full
entire-
year?
Yeah, like the full year in the school, or should there be some leeway? Would Becky like that, or would you prefer to not have that leeway be up to you?
Yeah, I was going to say, I would leave it up to the discretion of the superintendent on those. I think we just say the. You're a better drafter than me.
So I'll make a general motion, and maybe that will work if I say I make a motion that we provide a gift for RSU 5 employees as discussed at this meeting.
Does that work for you? Cynthia's like, that's easy, I can write that down.
In the amount of?
In the amount of $300 each.
Second that.
Okay, so a motion from Valley, a second, motion from Valley, second from Maddie. Any questions? Did you have a question, Candy, or are you just ready to vote? Okay. She's adamant she wants to vote on this one. Okay. All right, all of those in favor? Great, none opposed. Thank you. Okay. So we are moving on to personnel. So in your folders, you have two things of salmon in there, but the one we're talking about right now is just the 2 pages.
I am delighted to recommend Mary Beth Steiner as the 2nd grade teacher at Durham Community School. She comes to us from Colorado, where she has been a 2nd grade teacher for the past several years. She has a master's in reading and received her undergraduate degree from Providence College. One of her references remarked, "She brings knowledge and experience to her 2nd grade team, but she is also willing to spread her work to other teachers within our building. As an instructional coach, I have used her instruction as a model for learning as we bring in new teachers. She cares deeply about both the educational and social emotional needs of her students. I see her having conversations with kids to calm nerves or to encourage and support their learning. Her heart is evident in her interactions." So I'm delighted to recommend Mary Beth to you.
Okay, so do I have a motion in consideration for approval to employ a 2nd grade teacher at the Durham Community School for the 2021-2022 school year? Susanna and Lindsay, thank you. Any questions? Valley?
Question, Becky. Do you know if any of these schools are in the same district? There are a lot of one-year employment stints, and I'm wondering if maybe the North Park and South Park are the same district, and
I don't know that because of, that being in Colorado, but I will tell you that all of her recommendations were stellar and that she did a phenomenal job in her interview. And that she, obviously has been there at Gold Rush for 4 years. And they're dying to get to Maine.
Thank you.
Is this early in the interview process for teachers? Because usually it's a little bit late. Is it usually later? I'm just curious because it seems number of candidates seems low.
The number of candidates is kind of low because she interviewed for a different position, we didn't kind of go back out. So that's why that seems a little bit, but it's not really early. And we have started advertising earlier and earlier because we find that creates a stronger pool of the candidates that we're getting.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other questions? All those in favor? Great. None opposed.
And next, I'm happy to recommend Stephanie Lawia as Peter Walensky's replacement as a school psychologist. She comes to us with her doctorate in school psychology from University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She has led executive functioning coaching groups at the middle level and provided individual counseling at the elementary and middle school levels. One of her references said, "And everything that Stephanie has done, her work has been superb. She's kind, solution-focused, and passionate about supporting all learners." We're very excited to welcome Stephanie to RSU 5.
So do I have a motion for consideration and approval to employ a school psychologist for the 2021-2022 school year? Vali and Angela, thank you. Any questions? All those in favor? Great, none opposed. All right, we are back to public comment. So we'll just do a quick pause to see if we have had anybody join us on Zoom.
We have, but I just wanted to remind anyone on Zoom to use the raise hand function if you'd like to make public comment, and then I'll switch the settings to allow you to speak. So I'll just give folks a moment if there's anyone who wants
We'll
to.
give folks just a quick minute to find the raise hand function if they wanted to share a comment.
Michelle, while we do that, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is there an exception? Can we bring this home?
So I'm going to talk about that in a second.
Okay.
Yep.
I see there's no other agenda item, so before
Yeah,
we
yeah,
go.
no, I was just, I asked Ginny for a sticky note to remind me, and this is what I got. She knows me, that sticky notes are clearly not enough. Okay, so it looks like we're all set for public comment. We're not seeing any raised hands. So before we adjourn, so the other salmon sheet that you have in your folders is the superintendent evaluation information. There's a cover memo that explains the process and the timeline, as well as the initial documentation. You will be getting an email from Ginny this evening with the link to the actual evaluation. There's a printed copy in your folder so you can take a read through it ahead of time. May 2nd is when we're asking all the board members to have completed the online version. And then you'll see on the timeline that we'll carry on from there in the process. And Angela, I'll probably just reach out with you just because it's your first time going through the process for how it works. But yes, everybody can take home. So put the two personnel sheets back in your folders, but you can take home the eval information for now. We will collect it back at the end so that it can be shredded. Just a reminder, obviously, it's all confidential information that can't be shared with anyone. With that said, I would take a motion to adjourn. Susanna? Rick, you can't vote. Oh, Rick's reminding us that we can't leave. So we have to go sign all of our papers in order, same line every time. So Susanna and Beth, you have a question?
I just have a question. You said put the two papers back, but we can take this.
So-
So you mean the person?
So the personnel
Okay,
sheets,
so
those are two
this
sheets. Put
we
those
are
back.
allowed to take
But the
home for
package you
now.
can take,
Okay,
yes.
all right.
Yep, the
Thank
eval
you.
paper you can take with you. Yep. So you weren't seconding the motion to adjourn?
I can second that.
You can
as
do
well.
that too? Perfect, thank you. So Susanna and Beth, all those in favor? Great, thank you.